Hub center steering bikes aren't new, but with so many benefits that come with the technology, why haven't they seen any significant success in the world of racing, or for that matter, in production bikes? In this video, we're going to take a look at some of the significant attempts in racing history, how successful they were, and why it never took off. Before that though, let's dive into the basic idea of hub center steering arrangements and their benefits. For the uninitiated, hub center steering on a motorcycle is an alternative front suspension and steering system that differs significantly from conventional telescopic forks. In traditional motorcycle designs, the front forks handle three major tasks: suspension, which is how the bike absorbs shocks on the road; steering, used to change the direction of the bike; and braking, where the forks have the job of damping the braking forces while maintaining stability and control. Hub center steering, on the other hand, separates these functions. The suspension and steering mechanisms are independent of each other. With hub center steering, when the rider turns the handlebars, the input is transferred through a series of linkages and arms to the hub at the center of the front wheel. This setup allows the wheel to pivot around the center and steer the motorcycle. The suspension is typically integrated into the hub system but functioned independently of the steering. Various designs use different methods to achieve this, such as swing arms or links. This independent suspension setup helps in absorbing road bumps and maintaining the contact with the road without affecting steering. So that's how it works on a basic level. But as a technology, why is there still a small group of people still chasing the idea that it should replace telescopic forks? Surely there's got to be some big benefits to make it worth the pursuit. Well, there are. The first is how it improves front-end stability, particularly under braking, due to the lack of front-end dive seen with conventional forks. From an engineering perspective, front-end dive is bad because it affects the bike's ability to do its job, creating a stable and consistent traction situation and feeling for the rider. As the front-end dives, it alters the geometry of the bike, creating an inconsistent handling situation. Now, this geometry change under braking can be seen as a benefit in getting the bike to turn, but it stands to reason that a more balanced and consistent handling bike would potentially have higher performance ceiling. The other issue with front-end dive under hard braking is that it compresses the forks to the point of having little to no suspension travel left, making it far less effective at dealing with the imperfections on the road. While weight is still transferred to the front end during braking to aid traction, hub center steering arrangements don't experience the same diving effect, creating a more stable and consistent handling motorcycle. Another benefit is that the suspension and steering are in separate systems, so the steering isn't negatively affected by the suspension trying to do its job, once again creating a more stable situation with less unwanted feedback from the front end. And the last big benefit comes from weight. While the system itself is more complex, sprung weight can be reduced because the headstock, frame and forks don't need to be so robust to deal with the braking forces trying to bend the forks about the headstock. From an engineering perspective then, those are the biggest benefits of hub center steering, and you've got to admit they sound like pretty good ones when you consider a racer's job is to get past the guy in front, and if you have a bike that's more stable with better and more consistent grip at corner entry, it's got to be something people have tried to race with. And yes, there is history of this with a few notable attempts over the years. While hub center steering appeared in production motorcycles as far back as the 1920s, it wasn't until the 60s that we actually saw versions of the technology appear in competitive racing. In 1969, Jack DeFazio, an engineer from Somerset, England, developed a hub center steering bike for the road and race use, and went on to build 50 more bikes over the next decade. His designs were looked on very favourably at the time by the press, and after a handling and stability test conducted by the University of Manchester, it concluded, "The DeFazio is the best overall machine currently available for high-speed touring, by virtue of its high general stability, good handling, high comfort, excellent front brake and exceptional load capacity." Hub center steering is one solution to the motorcycle stability problems that manufacturers will understandably not admit or discuss openly. But even with such glowing endorsements, no major manufacturers embraced the chassis arrangements to any serious degree. In the world of racing, it wasn't until the ELF project in the 1980s that we saw serious investment in the technology at the highest level. The most notable year being 1986, where Ron Haslam piloted the ELF 3 to multiple top 10 finishes and 9th in the championship standings. It showed promise, and Honda even signed an agreement in the mid-80s to bring the ELF's patented design to market, but after developmental issues and the French petroleum giant pulling the funding in the late 80s, the potential was never fully realised. The next notable attempt was the Bota Tay 1D, released in 1991 and taking encouragement from the Elf machine that come before it. The road-turned-raced bike had a smattering of appearances through the early 90s in World Superbike, but its most promising feedback came from Alan Cathcart, who raced the bike in any Pro Twin events around the world they could. Speaking about the early appearances on the bike, Alan said, "With steering and braking functioning separately, I could brake unbelievably late for a turn and still crank over into the apex while squeezing the lever as hard as the front tyre would let me." The bike wasn't without its problems though. With a vague feeling at the front end and tricky setup issues which took some time to iron out, it meant there was some stability issues on high-speed straights. But once again, even with some impressive podiums and signs of things going in the right direction, before the bike could be developed further, Bimota hit financial difficulty and the company disappeared. Also in the 90s, we had the Yamaha GTS 1000, or at least a version of it that was raced at the Isle of Man TT. Built by Stephen Linsdell in his spare time, it went on to achieve 3 top 10 finishes in the Formula 1 TT class from 1994 until 1996. Then, for the next 15 years or so, the noise around hub center steering bikes goes pretty quiet in the racing world, with most action taking place by small teams in local or low-level championships, with little going on with any worldwide attention. That is until Virus, an Italian bike manufacturer that focuses mainly on production bikes, set about creating this, the Virus 986 M2. It's a Honda-powered 600cc racer that was designed to compete in Moto2. But after struggles with finding partnering teams to use their frame designs, the dream of testing the technology on the world stage died, eventually leading to the M2 being launched as a race bike for the road. Some years later, a young Bradley Ray competed with this bike in the Spanish CEV Moto2 series, a hyper-competitive series that is often seen as a feeder class to the world stage, but once again funding ran out before any potential could be realised. So we talked earlier about the positive points of hub center steering designs, but there are some drawbacks that have stopped it from succeeding. From a rider perspective, the biggest complaint you'll often hear about is the lack of feedback through the bars, though a lot of that talk was from technology that was designed decades ago, as engineers learned how to create simpler and more direct steering linkages that would have improved. And if you listen to road testers riding more modern attempts like the Virus M2, they say that the feedback is still there through the bars, it's simply different and something to get used to. Going through this history and all the research to find it, while there are some riding drawbacks, it does become apparent that the main challenges of adopting this chassis setup aren't actually anything to do with the bike itself, but rather how the racing world is as a whole. Hub center steering was developed to overcome the limitations of front forks over 100 years ago, but forks are still present at the very highest level. That's an awful lot of development to mitigate the issues that are inherent with the tried and tested arrangement. Then you have the teams themselves, who are notoriously conservative and risk averse. Asking them to take a huge risk on a completely different technology for the promise of marginal gains in the short term is a lot to ask. Then there's the riders themselves, who are also taking the risks, hoping that they get used to this new technology and can get over the differences in feeling to make best use of it. From my own research, I think it's fair to argue that this revolutionary tech has never really been given a fair shot, where either development funding couldn't continue, or it was simply never there because the bike was built in somebody's shed. But forks are so ingrained in motorcycle racing from an engineering and rider perspective that it would be a massive undertaking and massive risk to spend vast sums of money trying to employ a completely different technology for the promise of slightly better performance. At this point then, hub center steering bikes are more likely to continue their life as the toys to be enjoyed for road and track users that just want to give them a try, but it's difficult to see them overcoming the challenge of convincing conservative and risk-averse racing teams to try something so radically different. There are some out there, I'm looking at you Gigi, but there won't be many. However, I don't think this is the end of the story, and it's one that's worth keeping an eye on because there will always be people that are looking to move things forward while taking on the risk to do it. Just like they are with aerodynamics in MotoGP, something you can learn about in this video here. So what are your thoughts about hub center steering bikes, and do you have any experiences of your own? I'd love to hear it in the comments down below. Outside of that, thank you so much for watching this one, and I will see you in the next one. Take care.